The information provided on Terminal Addiction Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified provider with any questions you might have regarding medical or mental health condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, the hosts, are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization or institutions. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no guarantee regarding the completeness, reliability, or applicability of the content discussed. Listening to this podcast does not establish provider-patient relationship. If you're experiencing a medical emergency or mental health crisis, please contact emergency services or crisis line immediately.
All right, welcome to another edition of Terminal Addiction Podcast. I am Doug H.
And I'm Paul B.
And today we want to talk to you guys about knowing when you're ready. Paul and I have been in recovery for about 5.5 years, and both of us have had different journeys on this way to getting sober and clean. And I think both of us at previous points in our life, had tried to get, clean and sober, but for whatever reason, we weren't ready at the time. And so we want to talk to you guys about, our experiences and maybe how we knew we were ready or different levels of readiness that we've had throughout our lives.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I had a serious health scare 8 years ago, and it should have by all means been my wake-up call to get sober. And I did for a few months, but it really wasn't in my mind yet to get sober. And so after a few months, it failed pretty miserably. Wishing sobriety on somebody else doesn't work either. My family wanted me to stop. Threats of breaking off relationships didn't help. It really wasn't until I was ready that I knew that I had kind of reached my rock bottom, that I finally went to treatment and got sober and remained sober.
Yeah, I think I had previous attempts at sobriety, and I think they were all for other people or for outside circumstances or situations or consequences. But, until I was truly ready, I don't think that anything was going to stick. As I've talked about in maybe previous episodes, my first encounter with AA and treatment or recovery or sobriety or any of that kind of stuff was when I was about 16 years old. I remember being at a party at a friend of mine's house, and his dad, who apparently was clean and sober, came over to the house party where we were in high school. And I just remember him telling me, he said, "You drink different than the rest of the kids." And at that point, I don't think I knew what that meant. But he asked if I would go to a couple meetings with him, and I did. And, some seeds might have been planted, but I don't think that I was ready. I don't think it was going to stick. I think I just wasn't ready. And as I go forward in my career now, I hear a lot of people say they're not ready. And I understand what that means. And it can mean a lot of different things. Fast forward a couple of years, I was 21. I had 3 DUIs. I was failing out of college. And like Paul talked about, for all intents and purposes, for a normal, sane, rational person, that would have been more than enough to get their attention. But it wasn't enough for me.
Yeah, I even went to the extreme extent of I had a do not resuscitate order in my medical chart. I knew that it was going to kill me, and I didn't care at that point. It really wasn't until I realized that I could control this by getting sober, by going through treatment, by getting help from other people. And it wasn't until I realized that there were a whole lot of other people who were going through the same thing.
Yeah, I think, when I was, in my teens and 20s, and the way that I saw the world and the people that I was spending time with, everybody drank and used, and most people that I had surrounded myself with drank and used similarly to how I did. We were all pretty extreme with what we did. We all were, drinking and driving. I think almost everybody I knew had a DUI or something like that. A lot of people I knew had drug charges and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't that I was, different from the rest of the people that I was hanging out with. I had just surrounded myself with like-minded people who drank and used the same way that I did. I think the first weekend, and I'll apologize to mom and dad right now. First weekend I was down in college. In the first week I was there, I don't think I went to any classes. I just found some good old boys from Tennessee and Kentucky who knew how to drink whiskey and beer, and we just partied. And so for me, there was nothing, weird about what we were doing. It was just what we were doing. And then when I got into my 20s, after I tried getting sober once before, I was hanging out with people that bought and sold drugs, that were drinking, that were bartenders, and it was just part of the lifestyle, I think.
I was more of a solitary drinker. I did have a few friends that I did drink with at work. Matter of fact, a really memorable situation for me was she got arrested for a DUI, and the next morning I picked her up fresh out of county jail, and I had just been drinking myself when I picked her up.
Yeah, I think my solitary drinking really kicked in, later in life. But I thought I was still, and I hear this term thrown a lot, I thought I was still a functional alcoholic. But in essence, what that means to me is I needed alcohol to function. So I think early on, the people I was spending time with, it wasn't anything, weird to see people getting DUIs and spending some time in jail and this, that, and the other. And for me, it was, I just wasn't ready. I thought I could control this. I thought I was special, different, and unique, and that the rules didn't apply to me. And I come to later find out that that's a pretty common trait amongst alcoholics and addicts is we think we're special, different, and unique, and things aren't going to happen to us. The consequences are for other people. I always thought that I could just stop whenever I wanted. And then when the time came that I wanted to stop, I found I couldn't.
Doug and I both see a lot of people that their introduction to sobriety is court ordered. They're facing jail term or prison term, and I sign court slips every Saturday. You're ordered by the courts to attend so many AA meetings, and so we sit there and sign them. A lot of those people make it, and a lot of those people don't make it. And my sponsor right now, he faced 5 years in prison, and so that's really what got him sober.
Yeah, I read a lot of letters for probation officers working at a treatment center, and it's just it's hard to make somebody ready. I think there's a group of people that no matter what you do, they're going to get it. They can go to any treatment center. They can go to no treatment center. They can go to AA. They can go to church. And whatever it is, they're going to get it. There's this other sect of people that no matter what you do right now, they're not going to get it. They could have Bill Wilson himself as a sponsor, and they're not going to get sober. And then there's this middle group, and that's really where being a counselor comes into play. There's this group of people that, they want the consequences to stop. They want the pain to stop. They want the infliction on themselves and their friends and family to stop. But I don't know that they're quite ready to quit drinking and using yet. So it's my job as a counselor to try to show them, the educational piece, introduce them to the possibility that life can be okay without drugs and alcohol. Because when I was younger, when I was growing up, when I was drinking and using, I think I saw two doors. I saw that life sucked drinking and using, and I saw that life sucked sober. And it wasn't until somebody else showed me that magic door number 3 that life can be good without drugs and alcohol. And I would have never figured that one out on my own. Either I was too smart or I wasn't smart enough to figure that out, but I wasn't ready. And until somebody showed me the the possibility and the hope of leading a happy, healthy, sober life that had purpose and meaning, I was not going to figure that one out on my own. I was doomed to die an alcoholic death, and I was okay with that, like you were talking about, Paul. So yeah, Paul, there's actually a quote from the AA Big Book, and I don't pretend to be a big book thumper, but I've really, really always enjoyed this particular quote, and it's from out of the 4th edition. It's page 425. The story's called Window of Opportunity. And it talks about one definition of a bottom is the last point, is the point when the last thing you lost or the next thing you're about to lose is more important to you than booze. And then it goes on to say that point is different for everyone, and some of us die before we get there. I've just always thought that that's a really powerful quote, talking about, hitting bottom and how do you know you're ready and all that kind of stuff. And some people are never ready. Big Book also goes on to talk about, some people follow this idea of drinking normally into the gates of insanity or death. And I think I was perfectly okay with doing that. I kept hitting bottom after bottom after bottom after bottom. And everybody around me knew that the fun had run out of my drinking, but I don't think I'd realized it yet. And so it wasn't until whatever that last thing or the next thing was that I was truly ready. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't anything great. It wasn't a DUI. It wasn't a lost job. It was just, getting stuck in that cycle of every day being the same and living somewhere between, drunk and hungover constantly. And that was more or less my bottom. And I'll talk about it in my lead, and we might talk about it on some episodes, but it wasn't until like something happened, and it wasn't the most grand gesture that the universe ever bestowed upon me, that I was ready. And it was an internal readiness. Externally, I think I'd been wanting this roller coaster to stop for a very long time. I didn't see how I was ever going to get off this moving train. And so it took some outside help, took treatment, took going back to meetings. But this last go round, 5.5 years ago, getting clean and sober, I hit a different kind of bottom. I hit more of a emotional bottom that time, not so much a physical bottom, but losing who I was as a person and feeling like my soul was drying up. And I just really didn't want to keep living that way anymore. And I think until a person reaches that sort of a bottom, and has the desperation, they talk about in the Big Book again, the desperation of a drowning man, until I was ready to hit that bottom and feel those feelings and commit to this, I don't think anything was going to work.
Yeah, and to share my story, I was, drinking from morning to night, and then again, throughout the night, sleeping 15 minutes at a time. I was popping Benadryls throughout the day, taking 100 milligrams of Benadryl just to fall asleep. And it was when I realized that I was doing all that, that I knew I needed help. I knew that I couldn't do this on my own anymore.
And I'll talk about mine, but I'll ask you this, Paul. Do you remember having any of these moments of clarity throughout your drinking where this is an opportunity, this is a place where the train stops and I can get off? I just remember multiple times, and again, a sane, rational person would have had 1, 2, 3 DUIs, and that would have probably been enough. I had to go get a fourth one. I knew what I wasn't doing. I knew what I was doing wasn't very smart. I knew that it carried potential consequences, and getting a fourth, fifth DUI, those are pretty hefty consequences. But I don't think I cared. I think there were, some half-assed attempts at getting sober throughout my life, but I think, I've really only had 2 main periods of sobriety, and I think both of those came from me being ready. I don't think it was anybody else wanting me to do it or being ready for me. It really took, me clanking around at the bottom of that well until I actually hit the bottom to figure out that there was a different way out of this. So I'm curious, were there any attempts at getting clean and sober that didn't work? Maybe some of those moments of clarity that you didn't take advantage of.
Yeah, well, my moment of clarity should have been when I spent a week at a big university hospital, told that my liver was shutting down, and I had gone in and out of the hospital multiple times, spent several nights in the emergency room. That should have been my moment of clarity. But my moment of clarity was actually when I was drinking, taking the Benadryl, sleeping 15 minutes at a time around the clock. And my wife pointed out to me at 8 o'clock in the morning when I walked out of the garage with a full glass of vodka. And that was, I had just given in at that point.
Yeah, and I think there's all these markers throughout our drinking and using career where after you've got some time under your belt, you can look back and go, it was bad then, it was bad then, it got real bad then, it got out of control then. And any of those times, would have been a perfectly good opportunity to quit drinking and quit using, but for whatever reason, addicts and alcoholics are resilient in a weird way, and we just keep thinking we'll find that answer at the bottom of a bottle somewhere.
Yeah. Somebody told me, probably a year ago, and he said, my problem is not alcohol. It's actually the medicine. And my problem is all the things in my head that, created that. And that really resonated with me. I had a long history of PTSD that was not treated effectively. And so I was always trying to treat my sleeping problems, my PTSD with another bottle of vodka. And that just caught up to me.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing the wise philosopher Homer J. Simpson one time talking about how alcohol was the cause and solution to all of life's problems, and I remember just seeing that on an episode of The Simpsons, and it just caught my attention. But I use that quote a lot with newcomers and with patients, because it was for a while it was my medicine, like you were saying. For a lot of years, it was the only answer I could come up with. It was the best way that I knew how to either feel my feelings or not feel my feelings, or have any sort of courage, or felt like I fit into the world, or felt like I had something that made me stand out from the rest of the world. I just used it as a solution to whatever I had going on. And then at some point, the solution stops working as much, and then it stops working altogether. And I think that's when I kind of found myself at this crossroads of just go on and keep drinking and keep using until something really, 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 really bad happens, or try something else and listen to the people around me that were begging me to save my own life. So I think that actually leads us into another topic that we were talking about. And these are some various ways that maybe people, different avenues that people go down to get clean and sober. You'll hear Paul and I talk a lot about 12-step programs. Paul and I are both, avid members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've also had, a fair amount of experience in NA, Narcotics Anonymous. But we want to talk about maybe some other ways that people find their way into sobriety, into recovery. And I know of a few, and Paul's got a few he wants to talk about. So I'm going to turn this back over to him for a minute.
There are other ways of getting sober besides 12-step programs, and we've both met many people who've gone through them with mixed success. Back in the 80s, we were just talking about this right before we started recording. Back in the 80s, there was a moderate movement where people just tried cutting back, and it actually didn't work out very well. But now with medication assisted treatments, with many other religious programs, counseling programs, therapy sessions, there are some programs out there that do have some success. So we're going to talk about some of these.
Yeah, Paul had mentioned earlier, and I'd forgotten about this one, something called the Sinclair method. And I think more or less that's sort of a harm reduction model. Drinking, using less. And I think the theory there is if we can get somebody to cut down, cut back, maybe that will eventually lead to them quitting, stopping using and drinking altogether.
And the Sinclair method uses naltrexone along with, some therapy. But it doesn't ask the attendants to completely stop drinking initially. Eventually, the theory is that it's going to reduce their cravings, and by doing that, they'll eventually stop drinking. One of the more recent ones is using the GLP-1 drugs, Ozempic and Mounjaro and Trulicity, those types of drugs, along with therapy and harm reduction to achieve sobriety in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's still a fairly new method for treating alcoholism or treating addiction in general. And I work with a lot of people at a treatment facility, and I know that our attending doctor has some mixed feelings on that. I know we have had a couple patients who have come in who have been on it. But it's just another avenue that might work, and I think it's worth all the research that people want to put into it. Because if it helps and it saves one person, I think it's a good solution there. But I think there's a lot of other ways that people go about it, and that harm reduction model, I see that a lot at treatment facilities these days, and even in the room sometimes, is less harm is better, but less harm is still harm. And I think that's a slippery slope for people to be on, because for me, a drug is a drug is a drug is a drug. Addicted to one, addicted to all. And if I can just leave that side gate open for something else to creep back in, I think I put myself in maybe unnecessarily risky situations.
One of the things that really took off during the COVID pandemic were online communities. And it was all new to us. Doug and I started treatment right during the COVID lockdown, and it was hard to find an AA meeting that was in person. So along the line, we've met many people. I met 40 people on a cruise ship that all meet together on a Zoom meeting, and it's a different way. It's still kind of foreign to me. I'm very tech savvy, but it's still very foreign to me, meeting people on social media or on a Zoom meeting, and seeing that the same as an in-person support group. But it's certainly out there.
Yeah, and I think for a particular sect of the demographic, maybe younger people who are just grew up online, maybe that is where they feel more comfortable socializing with people, and so I think it's a great tool to have. I've done a lot of online meetings. I got turned on, during COVID. There was a meeting that I had found that ran 24 hours a day, and every hour it reset. And it was sometimes the people would stay in the meeting for 4, 5, 6 hours, and some people would just jump in and do their 1 hour meeting and get out of there. But it introduced me to different meeting styles, introduced me to a lot of people who were bringing their home groups to these online meetings. And so getting to interact with people all over the world, I know for me, if I woke up and I was in a weird place, I could just throw this Zoom meeting on and know that there were other sober alcoholics and addicts that were having a meeting, and they might be on the other side of the world, but they're still there for me. And I think that's one of the really cool things about technology and how it's had an impact in the way that people communicate and connect, and in our case, people get clean and sober.
One of my close friends, she lives in a very, very small community in rural Tennessee. And she was uncomfortable with going to an AA meeting in the community because she knew that she would know everyone there. And so she chose an online community. And, again, I'm not all that familiar with the online community, other than I've met a lot of people who do it. I've not done it myself much. Early on, in the first few weeks of treatment, I probably did one or two. I've always been more comfortable sitting down with a group of people, even if it's just 4 or 5 people to do a meeting. But, there's certainly an audience for that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Paul on that. I like the human contact. I like the human interaction that I get from actually going to a meeting, and seeing, body language and facial expressions, and just being able to pick up that vibe. I'm a big energy person, and just being in a room with other people is really good for me. And so for Paul and I to stumble into that 9 a.m. meeting that met every day at the park, shout out to anybody who attended that meeting with us. It saved a lot of people's lives, I think. It gave us a way to connect with people when the world was really distancing from each other. But a lot of people found that connection online, and more power to them. I mean, I'm not here to tell anybody that there's only one way to do this. And if people out there are listening and Zoom meetings are your thing, I'd love to hear more about it.
There are a lot of people that use meditation, mindfulness practices. There's even groups that called Recovery Dharma, where they practice more getting in touch with themselves. So there are groups like that. There are sober living situations where you're living with a group of people who are early in recovery as well. And they're great for, not just having the support of that small group of people, but you're able to share your thoughts, share your feelings about early recovery, which is really tough.
Yeah, and I think, again, coming from a background of mostly AA and NA, but then also, learning about and being exposed to some of these other recovery avenues has given me a lot of insight. And I think, there's more in common than there is different. I think if we look at something like that, recovery Dharma, they're talking about, meditation and getting in touch with the community and trying to find the right path. And working on personal growth. And I think you find those same concepts in other programs as well. They just maybe shy away from the big God word that a lot of people maybe struggle with, and they just look at changing who you are and using the principles of the Buddha to help somebody move forward. But I definitely think incorporating mindfulness practices and meditation and prayer and all that kind of stuff, it's just all part of it. And if somebody is more focused and more concentrated on one area, and that's what works for them, and they find that the recovery Dharma is a good avenue for them, I think that's great. There's also something out there called Celebrate Recovery, and I know that's kind of a growing idea. Is this Christ-centered program that focuses a lot around, I believe it's the Beatitudes. It's a program I've been to a couple of times with a few people, and they do things a little differently. They kind of put everybody together, and I think there's something to be said for that. So you've got alcoholics, addicts, gamblers, sex addicts. You just got a whole bunch of people with stuff going on, and they all get together, and somebody does a testimonial, and they sang some songs. And then they break out into men's and women's groups, and then maybe focus down from there a little bit more. So I think that's a great thing, and there's a lot of churches that are wanting to support this, and so they open their basements to AA and NA, but a lot of times they're opening their church doors to the people maybe in their church community who are searching for something maybe a little bit more faith-based.
One of the things that a lot of these programs have in common is that they're trying to improve your connections with yourself in order to improve your relationships with other people. And, AA is based on that, adult children of alcoholics is based on that, NA is based on that. And a lot of these religious programs and secular programs as well are about improving yourself in order to improve your relationship with others.
Yeah, and again, just looking at a lot of the commonalities they have there, I think all these groups are talking about taking personal responsibility and self-examination. They talk a lot about making amends and service to others. They talk a lot about relationships, and I think that relationship with yourself is the most important one you can have, because that relationship you have with yourself carries into every relationship you have with other people. That relationship you have with yourself carries, over into the world and how you interact with the world around you. And so I think a lot of these other avenues are terrific. I don't think there's anything wrong with anybody getting sober any way that fits them.
One of the things that I see a lot in people in early recovery is steps to improve themselves, our personal development goals. I see a lot of people that go back to school, finish a career that they wanted to start. They also pick up healthy lifestyles, running or weightlifting. And that's all part of the recovery process too. Again, it's improving yourself to improve your relationship with others.
Absolutely. And another one that I've been to a few of these meetings, and they're called SMART, SMART. And smart recovery is more of a self-managed, self-empowerment, personal accountability, which I think is all intertwined into other treatment and recovery programs as well. But they talk about the choices that we have, and I think when you're drinking and using, your choices are pretty limited. Everything I do surrounded drinking and using. And as long as I was drinking and using, and I could find, that little safe place, that little click I felt like I could go out and function in the world, but I just couldn't. And so I think that power of choice after a while for drug addicts and alcoholics gets removed from us. I think for people with eating disorders as well, I think that power of choice might get removed from them. People who are self-harmers, they lose that power of choice. And this smart recovery program almost gives you that back. Because everybody today who's listening, who's clean and sober, you guys have choices. And I think it's important to remember that. And am I making choices that are feeding my recovery, or am I making choices that are feeding, my next relapse? So this smart, program is really cool. And they use a lot of evidence-based methods, a lot of CBT. They do a lot of peer-to-peer, person-centered stuff. So I think it's great, and I encourage anybody who might be trying to find their footing in their recovery to try some of these. And again, some of them may only be online only in your area, but I definitely think all this stuff is worth checking out. I think there's value to all of it. Like I said, Paul and I are Alcoholics Anonymous veterans at this point. I think we're getting there. I've sat in my fair share of NA meetings and had some experience with the Smart Recovery as well as the Celebrate Recovery. So I think it's a great idea to get out and just see what all is out there, because there might be something waiting for you guys that you just haven't experienced yet. So I think that's going to do it for us today. We appreciate you guys listening. We'd love to hear about, how you guys found your bottoms when not the one that you're sitting on, but when you guys figured out that you were ready, what that looked like. We'd love to hear from you guys, whether it's emails on the website. You can hit us up on social media. If you got Paul and I's contact information, we'd love to hear from you guys directly, but we'd love to hear about, how you guys get sober, how you guys get clean, what that looked like, what your bottom looked like, how you knew you were ready, and which different avenues maybe you guys get involved in to find your recovery path.
And we welcome you to come back again next time, and look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization. This content is for informational purposes only and is not intended for professional advice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time.